So hello everyone and welcome to First Fridays, a webinar series about the business of being a spiritual writer. These informal conversations take place on the first Friday of every month. Today our guest is our good friend Dana Trent. Dana is a graduate of Duke Divinity School and professor of world religions and critical thinking at Wake Tech Community College. An ordained Baptist minister and former hospital chaplain, her work has appeared on Time.com, in Religion News Service, Sojourners, Religion Dispatches, and the Christian Centuries. Publishers Weekly calls her most recent book, Dessert First, Preparing for Death While Savoring Life, poignant, hilarious, and practical. And I can say personally, it's a wonderful book. She's also the award-winning author of One Breath at a Time, A Skeptic's Guide to Christian Meditation, For Sabbath's Sake, Embracing Your Need for Rest, Worship, and Community, and Saffron Cross, the unlikely story of how a Christian minister married a Hindu monk. So Dana and I have worked together at this past summer's Wild Goose Festival, and she will be serving as a featured speaker at our upcoming Writing for Your Life conference in Charlotte this March. So welcome, Dana.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for the gracious introduction. It's great to be here. I'm honored.
Well, I always love working with you, Dana. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise. And this has just been, 2019 was a magical, wonderful year. And so I'm really grateful to see what 2020 has in store for all of us.
Same here. Same here. So I've described some of your previous work. Can you let us know what new projects you're working on?
Sure. I would love to. And that was a part of a lot of discernment over the holiday season and thinking about 2020 and what's next, because I finished publishing 4 books in 2019, so it's kind of like, what do I do next? And so after much discernment over Christmas and New Year's, I've decided that I'm going to work on deepening the content that I have now, which for me means revisiting the books, rereading them, thinking about new insights, especially as it pertains to speaking. So thinking about our upcoming conference in March in Charlotte for Writing for Your Life and working with Barbara Brown Taylor. And the workshop that I'm going to be teaching there is called Pulling Back the Curtain on Creative Nonfiction. So what is it in terms of depth and breadth that I have learned from these 4 books, both in the content, the research, but also in merely writing them? What have I learned from that process? So revisiting those books. And then the other 2 things that I'm working on, I am working on 2 new books, which Fred is just going to kill me because he says, no more books. But I'm thinking about a Lenten book that may come out in spring of 2022. And then also working on a project that's really been brewing for a long time, which is a memoir of my early years growing up in Dana, Indiana, my namesake, called Breaking Good. And so I'm churning with that project and kind of seeing what's going to come next in those 3 containers, if you will, of deepening the work, working on a Lent book, and then working on a trade memoir.
Wow, wow. Well, you're busy as usual.
Thank you.
You're a very hard worker, which, I deeply respect. And, it's kind of thrilling to hear that you're going to be, taking your writing journey, to those additional steps. I think that's just awesome.
Oh, thanks so much, Brian. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So let's get down to talking about the business of being a spiritual writer, since that's kind of what this is all about.
Definitely.
And let's first start talking about sticky situations involving agents and publishing houses. How do you keep an amicable relationship with an agent when they can't contract your book with a publisher?
This is a great question. So it's 2020. If I were talking to myself in 2010 when I started this journey, this is what I would say. I would say, Dana, this is a people-based relationship business. This business is all about relationships, friendships, collaboration, not competition. This is about peacemaking. It's about bridge building, not burning bridges down. And for the most part, for the majority of this decade, I've tried to remain true to that principle, but there have been areas and times of sticky situations. And so when I think about what has helped me get through the sticky situations, and I'll describe some of them in just a minute, I think about humility. Remembering that as writers, we should position ourselves from a place of humility in that no one has to publish our work. No one has to take on our projects, take on our book proposals. You know, the publishers are very generous and gracious. And my mother used to say to me all the time, Dana, the world owes you nothing, and you owe the world everything. And I've never forgotten that. And that means to me that approaching publishers and working with publishers amid sticky situations without a sense of entitlement is really important. And in 2019, I had an agent for 1 year. Her name is Carol Mann. She's with the Mann Agency in New York City. Phenomenal literary agent, outstanding literary agent. And she took me on very graciously for a year. After a year, we amicably parted ways. And what it boiled down to essentially was that my project at the time was not a fit for any of her relationships. And she works, of course, with the big 5 publishers, including Harper, one that was interested at one time in this project. But it boiled down to fit. And at the end of the day, even if we may get our feelings hurt, we may get angry, resentful, frustrated, we have to remember that the books that we produce have to fit a publisher's need at that time. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. It's nothing personal. And so what you have to remember is that there's a fit and there's a formula. And when things get sticky, instead of taking it personally and saying, oh, they don't like my work, or they didn't treat me well, or blah, 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 taking a step back and saying, you know what, the book isn't a fit right now. Because what happened actually with that 2014 book is that it wasn't a fit for this larger publisher. I took it back from the agent. We parted ways mutually, amicably. I reworked the book, and then I sold it to Chalice Press, and it became Dessert First. So it worked out perfectly in the end, but it was important to keep a calm state of mind in that process.
Wow. Well, I mean, I totally agree with everything you're saying about this being such a relationship-oriented business. That's the same thing I've found myself. And then also, you know, on the side about publishing houses, as you said, they have a limited number of slots per year. And, you know, many of those slots are taken up by their existing authors, you know, bigger names, what have you. So it's really difficult to hit the timing right with any of them. And it's really difficult to do a deal. So, you know, I commend you for having that perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's when I have, it's grown over the years of understanding. And I think it takes some time, and we all have to remember that too. And so I hope those that are listening today and who will listen in the future of this recording will be patient with the process in order so that they don't burn down bridges. Does that make sense? Yeah, and you are so good at that. You know, we call you, writers call you the great connector, because you're so good about connecting people and helping build those relationships. And you are a conduit for many of us to understand how all of this works. And so even what you're offering right now, I think, is a huge help for people trying to understand the inside of the publishing business when it comes to spiritual writing.
Well, just like every other industry I've been in, you know, most people within the publishing industry assume that the whole rest of the world understands how it works.
Right.
That was the same in telecommunications, high tech, everywhere else I've been. And the reality is that no one who's outside of the industry understands how it works. So, you know, it's absolutely the case. You know, it just takes a lot of learning. So speaking of which, so let's talk about, you know, building relationships with publishing houses, right? Because you publish with several different publishing houses, even though, you know, your publishing career is, you know, relatively young. So to talk about, you know, how you identified, fostered, you know, developed relationships with different publishing houses.
That's a great question. So just for a little background for folks, you're exactly right. My publishing career is very young. I published my first book in 2013, fall of 2013. So I'm just coming up on 6 years. So 4 books, 6 years, 2 different publishing houses. So that's kind of the data behind the stories. And how that worked out is really, it goes back to that fit and formula piece. The first publisher that I had for my first 3 books, Upper Room Books, and I'm working on perhaps an additional book with Upper Room Books, I found them through a author friend named Enuma Okora, whom you also know as well, Brian, by going to her release party. So by supporting my author friends, she released her first book in 2010. It was published by Upper Room Books. The editorial director was there for the launch. Enuma introduced us. We emailed back and forth. So it was that connection of Enuma going to her author release party, getting to meet people, getting to understand the industry, looking at this publisher, that I was able to pitch my first book proposal, and Upper Room accepted it immediately. So like that, I don't know how rare that is. It feels rare to me, but it started again back to that relationship. So going out, supporting another author, learning about their work, and then them connecting me with their publisher. This is the huge benefit of working with small to medium publishing houses, right? Because you know people, you know the community, you can actually email people directly in acquisitions. And so for me, that was the open door to Upper Room Books. Now, working with Chalice Press, which is my second publisher, that came about from the idea that I wanted to publish this death book. I was working on it immediately after Saffron Cross, which was my first book, but it wasn't quite a fit for Upper Room Books. And I was very careful to give them first right of refusal, what I would call first right of refusal. And they said, you know what, it's not quite a fit for us. So, you know, feel free to shop it around, which is what I did with Carol Mann. It wasn't quite a fit for her and her contacts. So then I took it back and reworked it and then pitched it to Chalice Press, and it ended up being a perfect fit for them at the time. So that's how I came about having multiple publishers, because like you said, you know, not everything in terms of content is going to be fit for a publisher's what they call their front line, which becomes their back line. So, and they're working years out in advance. So it could be that they already have something in the docket that is on that topic. And like you said, it might be a seasoned author, someone they've worked with. And so I just ended up with multiple publishers because it was the right fit for the right publisher at the right time.
So let's go to another kind of inside story aspect of all of this, which is working with editors.
Yes.
So can you describe kind of how your typical interactions with editors have been?
Yes, great question. And one thing I thought of too that might be helpful for the listener, going to conferences, so going to Writing for Your Life, going to Wild Goose Festival, going to Festival of Faith and Writing, that is also an excellent place to connect with publishers in addition to connecting with author friends and utilizing resources like Writing for Your Life. So working with editors. I've worked with 2 editors in my career, Joanna Bradley and Lil Copen. Amazing, outstanding editors. Just like my publishers, Upper Room Books, Chalice Press, Joanna and Lil are incredible at what they do. And as the writer, again, talking about humility, I try to operate from the perspective of Joanna and Lil are the experts. They are the editorial experts. They know the field. They know how to edit. They know how to do the bird's eye view. They know how to do the line by line. So I rely heavily on an editor's expertise. I know other authors tend to push back on changes from editors. I welcome them. From the developmental stages to the line by line to proofreading, to typesetting, whatever we're doing, I welcome all the changes. But I'm curious, Brian, because you work with so many authors, what are the different approaches that you've seen in terms of working with editors?
Well, you know, I think, again, this is just based on conversations that I've had with folks. It seems as though it's a learning process. You know, many of them initially do push back, you know, and it's my baby kind of a thing, right? You know, so right. I don't want anybody to touch my baby.
Right.
And just as a side note too, you know this, and I think several of the people, you know, that are affiliated with Writing for Your Life do too, but the way I got into this whole Christian publishing industry was by working for Frederick Buechner's family to launch the Frederick Buechner Center. And I know based on, you know, things he's written and conversations that I had, that he really pushed back on comments that he received from editors. Now that's a pretty unique situation. I think
right.
The skill level that Mr. Fiedner
yes.
had for writing is
yes.
Way up there. Not to denigrate yours or anyone else's. But,
no. Agreed. Yes, he's allowed. He can do as much pushing back as he wished. Yes.
I think he's a little bit of an outlier. But I know Joanna and Lil very well myself and have a deep respect for them. So I can totally see how helpful that they would be, given their experience, given how many different books, how many different authors. So that I'm really glad to hear that you've got that kind of relationship with them.
Oh my gosh, I'm so fortunate, just incredibly fortunate. And here's a great story too for listeners. Joanna and I met via Upper Room Books in 2012 when they accepted the proposal, and we were of course acquaintances, and then she edited Saffron Cross, and then we've ended up being best friends, and I officiated her wedding in October 2018. So it's like you never know what's going to come about, from this deep relationship that you build with someone, because instead of the author saying it's my baby, you can't change it, it's great to say to the editor, this is our baby. Like, how do you want to shape this baby? How can we make it better and stronger? And that's just sort of been the way I've approached it in all 4 of my writing projects.
So this is kind of a little bit of a tangential question, but, and again, everyone's got their own unique situations. You've had 4 successful books, 4, I think, outstanding experiences. But even with that, have you ever considered self-publishing anything? Maybe that one of the traditional publishers wasn't interested in.
That's a great question. In fact, I'm going to reach behind me and grab a book that is self-published of mine. No one's, I don't think, ever seen this. It's just like totally plain cover. It says J. Dana Trent, and then on the spine it says, J. Dana Trent. This is a self-published book of blogs that Fred made for me. So I guess you could say Fred, my husband, is the publisher. And he made it for me and gave it to me for Christmas in 2011. So this was really like my first book, and it was just made by a company that compiles, blog posts and turns them into a hardback book. But I kept this on my shelf as inspiration. Like he said, keep the spine out, look at it every day, read your posts, and this will inspire you to move forward in your writing career. And so he actually did it on my behalf, but this is a self-published book of blog posts, which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. And what a great gift. And I think, moving forward, there's lots of fun genres I'd love to work with. I think fiction writing is the most difficult writing there is. And so wouldn't it be fun to try writing a novel and self-publishing it? Because, why not? Or working on a screenplay. And I just, all the genres that I haven't dabbled in seem like a cool experimental territory to dip one's toe in self-publishing. Because, Brian, I'd love to hear your take on this, but I feel like the publishing world changes every day, but I feel like in some ways we're getting ready to it's like uncharted territory. We really don't know what's going to happen next in the next 5-10 years. So like, what do you think about authors like me who publish traditionally stepping out into self-publishing?
Well, there's no one right answer, just like everything else in publishing, that's for sure. But it's very clear that the pendulum has been swinging toward self-publishing, meaning that, if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, self-publishing was pretty much a vanity endeavor.
Right.
It's just like if you were rich and you couldn't get somebody to publish your book, you just paid somebody to publish it.
Right.
Whereas now, the cost of self-publishing, the quality of the printing, the ease of use of the tools in order you to self-publish, the powerful distribution of online, whether it's Amazon or your own marketing efforts or what have you, it's just changed the game dramatically, right? So some people think that I'm a big advocate of self-publishing, which is not really the case. I mean, I tell people, I say, if you can get a really good traditional publisher, absolutely. And you're, a wonderful example of why that makes sense, as well as, plenty of the other authors that I work with. But not everybody can do that, number one. And number two, as you said, where are we headed? I mean, as a technology guy, I always kind of think about the future of technology and the future of online, and that isn't going to slow down. The capability, just like the Zoom. I mean, this kind of thing that we're using today, yes. Webinar technology 5 years ago wasn't anywhere near this good.
Yes.
So there's all kinds of enhancements to online capabilities that we don't even know yet are going to exist. Yeah. So, who's to say 5-10 years ago what the situation is? I think there will always be a place for the traditional publishers, because the people that do that really well, yes. Just like newspapers, right? There's always going to be a place for really good newspapers, despite the fact that the traditional newspaper business model has been struggling.
Right.
Like
exactly.
classified ads,
right.
what drove that, and they've pretty much gone away. So. In any event, never a dull moment, right? I guess.
Never a dull moment. Yeah, and it's so much fun to be on this journey with you, because you have the entrepreneurial spirit that brings courage and curiosity to the table that people like me who tend to be like, oh, you invite us into that space of curiosity and excitement, and your excitement is contagious. And I'm like, oh, wow, what is going to happen with technology in 5 years? And that's why, thank you for that insight, because you're right. As a tech guy, you bring a really unique experience to the table, because you've seen so many changes over the decades already. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen.
So when I was a little bit younger, I worked on some of the very early cell phones.
Oh, wow.
And at that point in time, it was a box that sat in the trunk of your car. It was about 1 foot by 1 foot by 4 inches. That was the dimensions of just to make a phone call. Forget text messaging or data or right. video or anything like that. This was just to make a plain old simple phone call. That's how much technology it took to do it. And that was in the early 1980s.
Wow.
So look how far just in our lifetimes, things have come. And so, fast forward 30 years from now, it's like, oh my goodness, who knows?
Right. Who knows? That's right. Mm-hmm. So being flexible, being flexible to this whole process is really important.
And continually learning,
Yes.
That's for sure.
Continue learning. Mm-hmm.
So let's switch gears now and talk about making a living as a writer. Most writers do things to make money other than just write, right? I mean, book royalties are not, enormous, right? So without getting into any, financial numbers or anything like that,
right.
Talk a little bit about what other incoming generating activities that you undertake. I know you're a teacher, right?
I'm a teacher, yes. I'm a full-time professor, which means that I'm teaching 9 months out of the year. We start school next Tuesday. But this is a great question, because I have only been full-time faculty, which is a very coveted position in my area. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, with all these major universities, so people graduate with graduate degrees and they want to teach, and the market is flooded here. And so getting a full-time faculty job is a big deal. But before I did that, I actually, and I want to tell this story, but I also want to tell it with a little caution. In April of 2011, I was turning 30. I had a full-time desk job at Duke. I had been promoted to being a writer at Duke, and I quit that job. I quit that job in April 2011, 30 years old, after my 30th birthday, to become a writer and to become a teacher. I had no contacts. I didn't know anything about freelancing. I didn't have a publishing contract. I wasn't working for newspapers. It was a complete leap of faith. Now, the caveat and the privilege of that is that I had a partner. I was married to Fred. I'm still married. My husband provided the income, and so I could do that. That's a privilege that most people cannot afford to do. And because of that, I was able to build my freelance career, and I freelanced until 2018, so 7 years of freelancing. So I've done 7 years of freelancing, and then now I'm working full-time in writing. Here is my advice. I think that baptism by fire of that 7 years of freelancing taught me how to work hard. You were talking about what a hard worker I am, which is like music to my ears, because I always in my mind think I'm not working hard enough. I'm not working hard enough. But that freelancing, hustling, trying to figure out where the next consulting job, article, book is going to come from, it teaches you how to produce and how to be prolific. So I recommend that in many ways. So taking on some freelance writing jobs for sure, but also having what I call a bread job. So a bread job is your steady Eddie income that helps you buy groceries, pay your rent, feed the kids, your obligations that you have. Because we all have personal obligations, and we know that many of the best-selling writers, including my favorite example is Evan S. Connell, who is a best-selling author of Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. He was a post office clerk, and he had kind of what he called a dull job, a bread job, and then he went home at night and he wrote at night and wrote in the mornings. And so having that bread job keeps you grounded. But the trick to that is siphoning off, saving enough energy so that you do have energy in the evenings or the mornings to write and get the work done. That's the hard part. That's the balance. But I recommend, certainly if you feel like that leap of faith is needed, make sure you've got a partner or some freelance bread job, part-time stuff lined up so that you can sustain yourself for those first couple of years of getting your feet wet in the freelance world.
Isn't it amazing, how sometimes in life having a forcing function will cause things to happen that wouldn't otherwise happen, right?
Amen. It is so true.
I've been there too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you did. In fact, Fred got me this. You can't see it, but it's a little square and it says, "You never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have."
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
So when I took that leap, I had to make it happen. If I was going to become a writer and a teacher, he's like, okay, you've got 1 year to kind of get this off the road, get this off the ground. And it worked. But yeah, you're right. It's necessity. What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. Is that right?
Yes. I believe that. I really do.
Yes. So that's sort of my both and. It's good to have a bread job, but it's also important to carve out those brave spaces for taking those leaps of faith.
So let's move on to another important topic, platform.
Oh.
The dreaded platform that so many of my author friends, cringe about.
Yes.
But you do that very well. But let's talk about kind of how that's changed since you first got started.
Yes. Well, first of all, you're very, very kind. Thank you. And when I first got started, I started writing I wrote my first article in 2008, but started, book writing in 2013. So between 2008 and 2013, the platform, I'm going to put that in quotes, was trying to get pieces published in magazines. And also, going back to this, blogging. Blogging was the platform. That was it. You had a website and on it was your blog, and this is where you were practicing your writing, getting your voice under control, I would say, wrestling your voice, and you were starting to share your work. And that's really where it started. And then from that, the layers, if we think about a layer cake, social media added on to those layers. And now I would say the icing, the top layer, is video. So I think building your platform on video and or audio, so podcasts like what we're doing right now, webinars. But, back in the day, it was fairly straightforward. You started a blog, you could start it from your laptop, and then, that's what you did. It's much more complex now because there are many more mediums and many more places to plug in, which means that you have to work harder to keep up with all these various channels. And you're so good at this, and so I'd love to, I'm going to be a student, and what are your latest and greatest tips for 2020 platform building right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, everybody talks about how much all of this changes, and that's sort of true, but quite frankly, ever since I got into this, which, isn't that long ago, Facebook advertising still continues to be the most optimal way to build fans, both from an author perspective as well as the conferences that I do.
Okay.
So, the bad news is that you have to spend some money to do that.
Right.
The good news is that, you can spend a little. You don't have to like spend a ton of money. But the even better news is that it allows you to target your audience really well, and it gives you very measurable results. Whereas like the past incarnations of advertising, whether it was, banner ads or billboards or, trying to get on a TV, interview or something like that, you had no idea if they drove any business or not most of the time. Whereas, with Facebook advertising, as I said, the targeting and the measurability is really, and just it's been more effective. I've tried Twitter ads, Google ads, Instagram ads, Amazon. I think that's probably the extent of it. And Facebook always comes out much more effective.
That's so interesting.
So yeah, so that's, I'm sorry it's not new news, but it's
I think that's really interesting. And for authors in particular, what kind of content do you recommend for them to use for their Facebook ad? Does that make sense?
Well, here's another one that's not necessarily new news, but yes, video is important, way more important than it used to be. But I think still that memes, are the most shared form of content. So, having a quote matched up to an image that immediately sparks an emotional connection. Right? Because everyone's attention span on social media or anything online is like a nanosecond, right? So, you've got to get someone's attention quickly with something they find to be compelling.
Wow.
So, how do you rise? That's the only way you rise above the noise,
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that's the only way. That's an overstatement. But the most effective way that I've seen to rise above the noise.
Wow. And it sounds like, and you can actually measure it too, which makes
it absolutely
effective. Yeah, because what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah.
You can tweet. That is so fascinating and so useful. And in many ways, thank you, because in my head, I make platform much more complicated. And so what I'm hearing too is that maybe it hasn't changed and maybe it's not as complex as I make it to be. And therefore that's good news because that's much less overwhelming.
Well, and here's another old school avenue that I think, again, in talking with lots of my other friends is very effective for them.
Yes.
Yes. Speaking engagements that are an overlap with the topic of your book or books.
Totally.
Right? So just getting your name out there, building relationships. It's not necessarily just, bringing a box of books with you when you go speaking and selling them. Some people do that and it works out well for them. But it's just getting your name out there, getting awareness of who you are, what you have to offer, what your message is, and, building those relationships. So, again, it's not, for a technology guy, that's pretty old technology, but guess what? It's not only helpful, but it's, very effective and useful for people.
Right. Wow. Thank you. That's really useful. Thank you. Yeah. See, and this is why, writers love you and love your resources, because you give so generously and you pull everything together, and things that we don't think about pulling together. Like writers, I'll overgeneralize and say we don't have this mindset. We want to make it really, really complicated, and often it can be very like, here's the 1, 2, 3. Like, it's much simpler than we make it out to be.
Well, one of the things I'm really excited about, with the upcoming Charlotte Writing for Your Life conference is not only having, featured speaker like you and Barbara Brown Taylor and, other folks like that. We're also, for the first time, going to include a segment for what I'm calling, for lack of a better term, emerging authors. So people who have published a book, but, just are really at the early stage of their career. to get them, speaking opportunity, relationship building opportunities. So one of our mutual friends, Kate Rademacher, is going to be part of that, as well as Aaron Hall and Nikki Hardy. So I'm really excited about being able to do that, to kind of broaden the tent, so to speak, give them the kind of experience and platform building opportunity.
Exactly. Yep. I think that's incredible. And we all need to do more of that, because, I would not be sitting here with you were it not for Enuma. There's no way. None of this would be possible without Enuma. And so the idea of, like you said, broadening the tent, bringing folks in, creating community. We have so many more resources to do that now. And I think it's amazing that you're helping us lead the way in that. So thank you.
So, given all the things that you're trying to juggle simultaneously, why don't you, and because I think the subject of time management is so critical for authors. So tell us a little bit of some of your secrets in terms of how you do that.
Yes. Well, I procrastinate a lot. I do a lot. And especially about platform. We were just talking about platform. I'm a big procrastinator. I am someone who needs external deadlines. So external deadlines work for me. So if that works for other writers, giving themselves deadline, or asking a partner, a roommate, a friend to give them a deadline, if they feel like the only way they're going to oblige is by having something external out here that they're reaching for, that is super useful. That is the only way I've written 4 books, is having that deadline. The second thing is, getting up early in the morning. So I used to get up at 4:30. I've switched it a little bit to 5:30, although some days when I'm teaching for the YMCA, which is something I do both for, not really for money, but actually for health, just for wellness and health. I get up at 4:30 still. So writing in the mornings, or writing in your peak time, whatever the peak time of energy is, but carving out at least 30 minutes a day to either work on writing, platform building, reading, so that you can deepen your speaking skills. That's what I want to work on this year for sure in 2020. And balancing all of that. So those are some of my sort of go-to secrets. This is the first time you see this office here, this huge space. I've never had an office before, so I'm really excited to see what 2020 holds for having an office, a dedicated space. I wrote all 4 books from this tiny triangle of an IKEA table, like this, with my laptop. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens when I spread out. And now in terms of balance, right, my whole second book was about this. So For Sabbath's Sake, Embracing Your Need for Rest, Worship, and Community, was about those 7 years of freelancing, of burning the candle at both ends and becoming physically sick and having to back off and figure out what the real balance is. And so I caution everyone, if you need a resource, that there's a book that is a resource, but also to know that there are seasons in freelancing and in writing, and that some seasons you're really, really busy and you're going to have to be organized and dedicated to those deadlines. And then some seasons, like right now, are a little, a ton of discernment. And so I don't have an external book deadline. So right now I'm working on my speaking. So I'm booked entirely for the spring. So what do I want to bring to each speaking event that I can be really thoughtful and think about carefully? So that's the balance. Every year has a different alchemy of work in terms of all the various facets and angles of writing. And so I'm finding that each year looks a little bit different in terms of what balance means, if that makes sense.
Excellent. I mean, within my own business, I have a similar kind of, seasons, so to speak, because there are only certain times of the year where it makes sense to do conferences. So I have to jam in everything I'm trying to do within those seasons, which makes me, there are very, very busy times of the year. But then December, January, February, for instance, for me this year, no conferences. So it gives me time to do webinars, gives me time to start on, new projects, things like that. So, but that's just, the own idiosyncrasies of that, of, my particular situation. But everybody's got their own, seasonality in some fashion.
They do. And I think leaning into that, because as a writer, especially if you're just freelancing, The season of being fallow or planning or discerning can be really anxiety producing, right? Because you think, oh my gosh, I'm not producing, I don't have a book contract, oh my gosh, what do I do? So leaning into that is really important. And also not procrastinating. So I would love to hear, I want to hear your tips for not procrastinating for writers when they're in these seasons of maybe not having a deadline in terms of a book that's getting released or a book contract. Do you have any tips for us writers who procrastinate?
Well, I can't necessarily say for a writer. I mean, everybody's got their own, you know what I mean, ways of managing themselves, so to speak, like that. But I know for me, I have two tools that I use. One is just like a Google document.
Okay.
That's a bullet list of priorities.
Nice.
Right. So, and they're bucketed into different categories, like all projects for writing for your life and publishing color is one bucket. Another bucket is small projects for compassion and Christianity. Another bucket is large projects, for writing for your life. Another large bucket. And then the fifth bucket is new stuff, that, if I ever get to it, or, if they're so exciting that I can't, put it off, I've got to do it, So I kind of manage that, and then I take the highest priority items from that and put them on my calendar. So Friday morning or whatever, I'm going to work on this.
Yeah.
Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to work on that.
Yeah.
And try to just, and oftentimes I end up having to juggle those around because I've got a phone call with someone or whatever that, it's important for me to take. But one of the things that I'm trying to see about launching now, very early stages, is a children's book conference.
Oh, wow.
Which that's what everybody says. There's several people, author friends of mine that say, Brian, you really need to think about doing a children's book conference. And everybody that I mention it to, oh yeah, that would be a fantastic. So anyway, I'm in the early stages of trying to figure that out, launch a new initiative in that direction. So in any event, those are the two tools I use. But I can't say that they're perfect for everyone. That's just for my situation, that really works out well.
I think that's brilliant. Especially, I love the Google Docs idea because all of the various to-do list tools we have don't necessarily put it into buckets the way you've just described. And I love that idea. And then you choose from the bucket what is the highest priority. That's brilliant. So
I color code things, they're at the top of the list. I'll put things in bold if I want to make sure that I see it again, or whatever, it's a little bit, again, old school. I don't use some of these, like you said, there's online tools that are specifically for that type of thing. I just, would rather, kind of design the architecture myself, you know what I mean?
Right.
Works for me, the way my brain works or doesn't work, but.
I love it. I think it's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. The Brian Allain method. It's great.
So why don't we finish up with stepping back and talking about, for a new writer just getting started, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Oh, yes. Okay. So there's lots of things, but I want to start with this quote because I remember hearing this quote years before I met you, and now that I've met you, the quote means even more to me. But it's the famous Buechner quote that the vocation is the place, and there's lots of variations of it, but the place where our deep gladness, passion, name it, meets the world's needs. So vocation is the place where our deep gladness or passion meets the world's needs. And writers find that place. So what is it that you are passionate about? What is it that makes you happy? What makes you glad? However you want to name it. You've got Buechner as your foundation. You can launch it from there. And then what does the world need in terms of a book, an article, a video, a webinar, a meme? What do they need from you, and what can you offer? What is your niche? Where do those two things match up? Find that, determine it, and let it be your guiding North Star. Doesn't mean it can't change or won't change, but that is your starting point. That is your starting point. For me, the starting point was my interfaith marriage. So this marriage, this brand new Christian Hindu marriage, And then we saw a need out in the world because there wasn't yet a book about these two specific flavors creating a life together. So our passion, our gladness of this brand new marriage and the world's need for having an instruction manual, if you will, on how are we going to do this, that's where the two met, and that's how Saffron Cross was born. So that's my advice for writers.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Thank you. And it's even more special now that I know you and all the connections to Beekner. That's awesome.
Well, that is his most quoted line.
Yes, it is.
Surprise, you know, I mean, it's been meaningful to so many different people. So.
Oh, gosh, yes. I'll never forget hearing it for the first time in div school in the early, 2003 and thinking, oh, that's it. That's it. It's incredible. Yeah. So thank you for continuing to share his work.
Oh, well, it's been an honor, believe me. So Dana, I want to really thank you for getting together this morning. This has been a wonderful conversation, as always is the case with you. Really looking forward to working with you in Charlotte and in March at the conference there.
Me too. Me too. It's going to be so much fun. I'm really excited. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, it's my pleasure, Dana, and you take care, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Okay, thank you.